All right, who's next up? Let's see, Recreation, Mr. Dennison. Yes, page 42. Mr. Dennison and Mr. Davis, D&D. Okay. Page 42. Gentlemen, proceed.
Good evening. I'm John Dennison. I'm the Recreation Director. Sitting with me is Tim Davis, the Assistant Recreation Director, if you have not met him. So the fiscal 18 budget for the Recreation Department, the major change is in the department head salary. I submitted 2 budgets late in the fall. One budget reflects an increase in the event of my retirement. We will have a full-time recreation director. As you know, I'm a part-time recreation director. The second budget, which is not shown here, would maintain the status quo with my part-time salary and a full-time assistant recreation director. I am not bound to make that decision quite yet, but I thought, in fairness to the town, in terms of planning, that I was considering retirement, that I would give them a heads up, so you don't get stuck trying to come up with money at the last second to fund a position. So the bigger of the 2 department head salaries is being carried here, and even if I decide not to go before the end of this fiscal year, I think it would be wise to carry that amount in the event that I choose to go in sometime during the next fiscal year, so that there's a smooth transition to a full-time recreation director. Beyond that, there are some small increases in the salary line items below the department head and assistant recreation director. Those line items all represent seasonal, part-time employees or seasonal full-time employees. For the most part, they're college students that work for the department. And that reflects a Commonwealth of Massachusetts mandate to a new minimum wage of $11 an hour, which affects bumps, if you will, our seasonal employees up a little bit. In order to be, abide by the law and also be competitive, basically most of those salaries will get bumped up a little bit. In expenses, a couple of minor changes in a couple of places. Clothing and uniforms put up to reflect closer to the amount we spent last year. We want to outfit our, we use that money for staff attire so that they're identifiable to the public and to the program participants. And we also want to better identify children in our playground program with T-shirts and so forth, so that when we take them off the playground on field trips and so forth, we can see them and know who they are and that they belong to us. I think the other change was in advertising and freight. We are replacing, for example, this year we had to buy a couple new backboards for Halloran Park, the basketball court there. The shipping for that item alone kind of blew the freight part of that budget. So I want to increase that line item because I anticipate that shipping alone, not the advertising so much, but the shipping alone will be a problem for us in the next fiscal year.
All right, thank you. Questions? Jody?
Yeah, if I'm reading this correctly, you're adding, I hate to put it this way, a half an employee. Can you explain why?
Yeah. So if I do retire, the recreation director's job will become a full-time position. And the thinking around that is twofold. First of all, there is plenty to do. This department and that part-time position started back in the 1980s, when this department only did programming. That's all we did. Now we manage and maintain several facilities in town, the West School Athletic Complex, 12 acres of ball fields. We collaborate with Public Works Department to maintain the Halloran Park. We contract out some maintenance for the playground area and also the Lesson Memorial Playground. We also collect fees. When this original job was set up, recreation was free. Your tax dollars bought it. And now, as you know, we go through a very complex collection of fees, depositing of the money, and managing a revolving fund so that we can pay for our programs and our seasonal, many of our seasonal employees. The department has absorbed the management of the budget of community events, which will be coming up after this budget. While we don't literally run those events, that volunteer board appointed by the Board of Selectmen does that part. We are now responsible for oversight of the budget and also giving those good volunteers some direction in terms of procurement and so forth, and make sure that the procurement office gets involved when necessary. We also anticipate, town manager and I have discussed this, upon my retirement, well, even before my retirement, if we do get a concessionaire at Cedar Hill Golf Course, that the assistant recreation director is going to manage that piece of the golf course. And we also anticipate upon my retirement that the Cedar Hill Golf Course will fall under a reorganization, will fall under the umbrella of recreation. So that is the rationale for the increase. There will be more than enough to do that person.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you tell us a little bit about comparable-sized towns with maybe similar-sized recreation area and the sort of staff that they have full-time? Like, do any of them have part-time recreation directors, or sort of how many full-time staff can you estimate that they have?
We are much smaller than most than recreation departments in towns of similar size. Tim goes to the South Shore area recreation directors meetings, and most of those towns are represented by full-time directors with full-time assistants, plural. There are some exceptions to that, some people who do very little or almost nothing. The town of Easton next door does not do much in recreation. But you go to the other nearby towns, and they all have a full-time recreation director and multiple assistants, plural. So if you use that comparison methodology, we are due.
Well, Mr. Dennison,
Mr. Lurie.
my question has to do with keeping a part-time budget. Would that allow us to keep you around longer than speeding you up into retirement on a full-time basis if we approved full-time budget?
I appreciate that thought, I think. Retirement is a highly personal decision based on a lot of factors that go beyond what happens in town hall. I can't tell you. I really cannot tell you tonight if I am going to go in this fiscal year or wait a bit longer. And what you folks choose to recommend with the budget isn't going to sway me one way or another. I'll have to make that decision based on, like I say, personal reasons.
Well, the only point was really about having a full-time budget. If it's a full-time budget, does that mean there's going to be a full-time situation where you're going to have to move either into full-time or you're going to find a replacement for the full-time salary that's approved?
Well, no, if I decide to stay into the next fiscal year, you could fund it as a part-time salary, but if I choose to leave, somebody will have to come up with the funding to fund that position, a full-time position for the rest of the year. And I'm not saying that's not doable, but that, in fairness to the administration, HR, and so forth, I have projected this possibility, put money in the budget so that they don't get caught short doing that, because there's been a lot of concerns about that in the past. So, there's two ways to look at it, and I understand exactly what you're saying. You can save some money off the top in a budget by doing that, but you might have to find it after the fact.
I got a quick question. There's no buyout for 18. Is that assuming you're going to go in 17, because there's one here in 17, or will we have to add something for that if it happens in 18?
Good point. If we went with a bigger budget, we would have to find the buyout money if I stay,
If you stay, which...
Yeah.
we
in
don't
the
know
next
yet.
fiscal year.
So it's a maybe. Okay. All right, Roberta?
I'm sorry, just second thought to follow up on that question. In my second budget submission, I did include buyout money with a part-time salary, but they chose to show this budget that does not show buyout money. Sorry, go
Well,
ahead.
if you don't go this year, something's got to go in for next year, right? I mean, you'll be here, and if you decide to leave in 18, then you're entitled to some kind of buyout, is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is this: you mentioned something about Cedar Hill and the chairman of the Recreation Department, the department head would take over some of the duties and responsibilities that had been part of the Cedar Hill.
And I don't want to speak for the town manager, but I do believe it is his intention to reorganize so that Cedar Hill would fall under the umbrella of the Recreation Department. Exactly what duties that would create for the Recreation Director and/or the Assistant Recreation Director, I can't speak to that right now, but I can see that the management and the budgetary pieces of that would be significant. The day-to-day operation, maintenance and so forth would go on, I believe, as it does now, but that would also require, time, visits to the golf course, supervision, keeping an eye on things. So it would be time out of the office in addition to the time that we're required to be out now in terms of supervising programs and managing maintenance.
Mr. Chairman, what I'm thinking about is that I've never seen anything quite like this before, but the other thing is Cedar Hill is an enterprise account.
Yeah, Mr.
So
Hartman,
you
would you like
need to have an article in the town meeting.
I don't think it's for next year, it's for the year after, if it's going to happen, 19, not 18.
So then, if it's going to
Let Mr.
happen,
Hartman explain what he
if it's
thinks.
going to happen in 19 and not 18.
It would be no different than water and sewer. The department head for recreation would be responsible for Cedar Hill. The operations of Cedar Hill would still be an enterprise fund.
Still going to keep the enterprise fund?
Yes.
You're not going to dissolve it?
Yes.
How come we just don't get rid of it?
Because it's slowly but surely turning around. The deficit for 16 is less than the deficit for 15, and we still believe that with a good, viable concessionaire, that it can break even.
So can we charge some of this cost off to the enterprise fund in the future, if it makes any money, from the Recreation Department?
You could, yes. Much in the same way, for example, that you charge off a percentage of Tom Fitzgerald's time to water and sewer.
All right.
I just think that, I've never seen something like this before. I would think that we'd go with just the part-time budget. And if Mr. Dennison chose to leave, then put in the money for the buyout, whatever that
Well, we're
happens to
just
be.
going over the budgets. We're not going to do anything right now. We're just hearing what everybody has to say, and we can talk about that when we start thinking about doing adjustments and things.
I understand
Lay of the
that.
land here.
I understand that, but can't even envision something like this being placed before us. I've never seen anything like this
Well, they're
before.
proposing to replace a full-time person with from the part-time to full-time. If he leaves, you need a department head, or you don't have to, I suppose you cut it out, but
So an entire town department has to rest upon, and the town meeting decision has to rest upon the fact that the one person makes a decision one way or another, and they're not making a decision one way or another, so we have to consider two different scenarios for the budget.
well, they're putting the worst-case scenario in. That's what it is, right?
So if we vote the 18, the fiscal 18 with the higher budget, then that money is there.
Well, if we don't use it, it stays there. Just go back to free
Well,
cash.
the thing is, could they use it?
Huh?
Could they use it?
No, it has to stay in the salary line. They can't move it around anyway. It has to stay within salaries. Is that correct, Mr. Hartman?
But it could increase the part-time salary line, right?
Well,
Well, it's
we'll get an
directed to
answer.
somebody.
I would hope the assistant manager, who's ever be in charge at the time, would not do something like that, because obviously that's not what its intent was, but
I guess what it boils down to simplify it, is if the recreation director were full-time today, or even 2 years ago, Cedar Hill would have been moved 2 years ago. The fact that the recreation director is part-time is what's prevented us from doing that reorganization. So John's retirement, if and when it comes, gives us the opportunity to do the reorganization. I don't want to have to come back to the Finance Committee hat in hand, asking for an appropriation from your reserve fund. Hence, we distributed this budget.
okay. John?
Could your budget absorb a 1 to 2% cut?
Of course,
Okay.
there would be consequences, but every budget can absorb cuts.
Okay. I'd like to see that happen.
Well, there'll be consequences. Some things won't get done, or we'll do less of something.
Yeah,
and
it's a
those are kind of
small,
decisions we have to
small cut for
make.
every department.
1% in this department is peanuts, as you know, because it's a
Right.
very small line.
Anybody
you.
else? We good? All right, thank you.